Welcome, Trophy Kids, presented by Bad News Media. It is college football week 11, early November. It's flying by, folks. It is absolutely flying by. Not something that we love here because we love our college football. We want more of it every single week. But we know we've only got a finite amount of games left. We got to try to maximize as best we can here. Got, as always, a little house cleaning before we go into the details of this week's games and breaking them down. And we start with the betting record. It was a disaster. 0-3 last week. Just not a good week. I apologize. Had some things come up in my personal life. It's no excuse. But it took my focus away from the ball. The eye was off the ball a little bit. We're going to try to get back here. I'm only going to give out one play on the podcast here. The rest will be given out on social media at Trophy Kids Pod on Instagram and Twitter. So make sure you check that out. But let's talk about the top 12 heading into week 11 for Trophy Kids Podcast. Lots of changes. Oregon remains number one. They are a consensus number one. I haven't thought about a second of moving them off that number one. They came into the season as number 3 in my rankings. After the Ohio State game, I've moved them to the number 1 spot. They keep getting better week in and week out. The offensive line is starting to gel a little bit better. I think, Klein and the OC and this offense are starting to gel a little bit better. Dylan Gabriel's feeling more comfortable here defensively. Really good defense from a passing standpoint. There is a bit of a weakness here. Like, this isn't a perfect football team. There is no perfect football team this season, but they'd have less flaws, I think, than everybody else. The one flaw that I think I would point to is definitely going to be offensive line health. They got to stay healthy on the offensive line. There's not a ton of depth there, but it's the ability to stop the rush. When you play really effective, good running teams, what will that do to them? So they're still the number 1. Ohio State moves into the number 2 spot. Georgia, the number 3. The only reason I did this is I just can't trust that Georgia offense. If they were to play tomorrow, I'd have it at a pick 'em. And I'd have it at a pick 'em because of Ohio State's offensive line situation, the left tackle position specifically. Yes, I know he played well against Penn State, but Georgia's a different beast. We saw what they can do defensively against Texas. They turned it up to a level we haven't seen any other team defensively turn it up to this season. That was a scary football team there. But Carson Beck's continued struggles, his continued turnover issues are a bit concerning. I'll talk about that in the Georgia Ole Miss breakdown, but they remain at my 3. Texas moves to 4. Miami, I got to respect them. I wasn't respecting them earlier because the defense, I think, is a massive problem. But when you have an offense that can score and play like you can, it gives shades of that LSU team, right? 2019. Not the same thing. Not going to say that, but a wildly talented team that needs the offense to constantly be cranking out points to win football games. That's kind of what Miami is right now. So they move into my 5 spot. The real changers here are Penn State and Clemson falls out of the top 12, obviously, but Tennessee moves into the 6th spot. IU, that's a fundamentally sound football team. Indiana is a fundamentally sound football team, folks. It is as simple as that. They don't make a lot of mistakes. They don't shoot themselves in the foot. They have great gap discipline defensively. They tackle really well. They just understand what they're supposed to be doing on every given down, and it is something to see. Are they the most talented team in the country? Absolutely not. But this is one of those situations where coaching has been really crucial for them. A lot of players came over for JMU. A lot of players understand this system. They've done a really good job of coaching up this unit. And when you play fundamentally sound football, you don't create a lot of penalties, you don't create a lot of mistakes, you're going to have a chance to win virtually every football game you're in when you have somewhat of the talent profile they have. When you have a quarterback who's playing in the upper half of Big Ten quarterback play right now, like IU, that's a fun football team. BYU at the 8th spot, Notre Dame at 9, Penn State drops all the way to 10. The reason I dropped them to 10 is, well, I do like the defense, and I love Andy Kolnicki, the offensive coordinator. The same issues persist at Penn State, and that is they do not have efficient pass receiving weapons. They don't have guys that can win one-on-one right now. They don't really have a downfield threat that can just take the roof off of a defense. It's been a problem the last couple of years. They still have that problem now. Andy Kolnicki, if it's not schemed up, they just can't get anything going outside of Tyler Warren. So they're in my 10th spot right now, but this is a fluid ranking. SMU, that defense is legit, and the offense is rolling. It's a different quarterback who's taken over for SMU as opposed to earlier in the season. So that gives me a little bit more respect because I can see what they're doing here now. And then Boise State rounds out the top 12. All right. With that done, let's talk some football games. And we are starting right off the bat with a battle in the Big 12, a race that is wide open, a Colorado team that could be in the playoff hunt here, folks. Yes, Colorado has a legitimate shot at a playoff spot because of the way the Big 12 is unfolding. But they have to go to Texas Tech this weekend. Line is at 4.5, over under 62. Colorado is the favorite here. And for good reason, right? This is a football team that's better than last year's for sure. And they've gotten better week in and week out. They are not the same team that they showed in early weeks editions of this football team. They have progressively gotten better defensively and offensively. I mean, this is a defense, 17 sacks in the last 4 games, giving up nearly 100 less yards than last season. They're 26th in EPA per dropback defensively. Like, this is a good defense. Not a perfect defense. This isn't a perfect team. I don't even know if they are the best team in the Big 12. That's a question that still needs to be answered. There's a lot of teams vying for that, but they are in that question. They are in that hunt for the Big 12 race. And offensively, this is where it could spell trouble for Texas Tech, that defense, because Texas Tech struggles to get pressure. They're outside the top 100 in havoc rate for their front seven. It's a laundry list of injuries on there. I mean, it looks like a CVS receipt with how many guys are on the injury report for Texas Tech right now. And you have a Colorado offense that, if Shadur has time, will tear you apart. And this bye week could not have come at a better time for Colorado because the wide receiver room was starting to get really injured. Now they've got another week to kind of rehab, get their legs back underneath them, go out here. And if Shadur's protected, he's not making a bunch of bad throws, they're going to carve this team up. So how does Texas Tech stay in this football game? Well, they got one of the most underrated running backs in the country with Brooks out there. You got to control the line of scrimmage a little bit here. You got to control possession here. Brooks is going to run for his 4th straight season of leading the team. Morton, the quarterback, does a good job of protecting the football. But Texas Tech, it's a curious case because while they are not necessarily efficient offensively, 72nd in offensive success rate, they are 20th in scoring, 24th in yards per game. Like, they move the football. It's just they've struggled when that field starts to consolidate a little bit there. So that'll be interesting for them. They need to be able to run the ball on Colorado. That's sort of where this matchup is really going to be determined, how close this game's going to be. It's going to be, can the Colorado defensive line, a unit that I said had the chance to be the most improved on Colorado's this season and would be the anchor to their success, and that is what is happening right now. Can they have gap discipline? Can they get off their blocks and contain Brooks and make Texas Tech a more one-dimensional team that has to pass the ball? That, I think, is your recipe for success here if you're Colorado. Let's talk about Georgia Ole Miss. Line is at 2.5, over under 54. The battle of defenses in this one. I mean, when you think Lane Kiffin, when you think Ole Miss, you probably think offense, and that's fair, but that's not what this team is. This is a defensive-led football team. The boosters and organizers for Ole Miss said this season they want to compete in the SEC, and that is why they spent the money for a game like this. They spent money on the defensive line to up the bodies there, to get more physical bodies on that defensive line. They have to show up in this game. They have to create chaos for that offensive line. Georgia's inability to really run the ball efficiently has put more on Carson Beck's shoulders. You pair that with Mike Bobo's offense that doesn't evolve week to week like the Todd Monken offense did 2 years ago. It's a little bit more stagnant. So defenses are catching on a little bit more to concepts that they're trying to win. It's starting to be a bit of a disaster for Georgia, is a disaster for Georgia. The turnover problem, like, whose fault is this? Is it Carson Beck's fault? Yeah, I think there's some blame that is certainly on his shoulders. I don't think it's necessarily a mechanical thing. I think there's definitely a lack of confidence. We see that in the way that, Kirby is sort of handling him. I think that it gives you an indication that there's some confidence building that they need to do with Carson Beck. I also wonder if his eye discipline is just not there right now. They seem to struggle when teams are playing zone, and he's sort of leading linebackers and defenders to his progressions early, and then he just rips it, and guys are able to shoot that ball. And so I think, I can't confirm it, but I think there might be a little bit of an eye discipline issue there as well. The second part of his struggle, though, like I said, is the Mike Bobo offense. Mike Bobo is a downgrade from Todd Monken. Now, I know Todd Monken was not Carson Beck's OC. Bobo was last year, and Beck was spinning the ball a little bit better. And people will say, oh, well, he had Brock, he had Ladd. That's certainly a factor here. Like, the talent, the easy outs that the Georgia had in personnel last season isn't there. But I think it's sort of year 2 of the Bobo offense. Defenses are catching up here a little bit to what he's trying to do schematically. He doesn't evolve week to week. Like, one of the greatest things about Todd Monken, and one of the reasons I'm so high on him in the NFL, and I was high on him when he was in Georgia, is Todd Monken is a very flexible coordinator. He very much goes in week to week and doesn't necessarily do the same thing because it's all opponent dependent. It's all based on what he's seeing on film, what he thinks he's identifying. Now, Georgia does a great job of the in-game adjustments, but it's those early struggles that concern me because it's like, what are you doing in the weeks leading up? You understudied under this guy, Todd Monken, who always had great game scripts, always was able to come into a game and had something up his sleeve. Where are you at in that process? So that'll be interesting. I think for Georgia, get a little drink of water there. The defense, we saw them turn up to a level that we have not seen another team turn up to in that Texas game. I mean, that defense was nightmare fuel for the rest of the country. If they can do that consistently, whoo, this is going to be a problem. And now you're going against an Ole Miss offense that is struggling. You're without your leading runner in Parrish. Trey Harris is banged up. We'll see what he's able to do. And if he's even really able to go, or if he's just going to be sort of a glorified decoy out there. Without him, what are the paths to success here? Because I've seen an Ole Miss team that has struggled in the trenches. The offensive line seems to really not respond well to physical defensive lines that can push you around a little bit here. Georgia can do that. They're fast, they're mean, they're aggressive. They're going to punch you in the mouth and get after that football. Jackson Dart's going to have to be better with his legs, I think, in this game. Lane's got to have something. Like, this is a game where you got to pull out all the stops. You got to pull out all the trickery. You got to pull out things that you haven't shown on tape yet. You got to be different. You got to take the Alabama approach. You remember that halftime when they're interviewing Kirby and he was like, yeah, they're throwing stuff we haven't seen yet. You got to do that here. Like, it's just, you got to play with some up tempo if you're going to hang in this game. I think this is going to be a low scoring affair. I love Ole Miss in like a teaser leg because I just think that defense, the two defenses, I think are going to have a pretty good control over these offenses. And I think the team that wins, they're going to turn it into a mud fight. It's going to kind of look like that Texas Georgia game where the defense are creating such favorable offensive starting positions that the offenses can roll a little bit here. But it's going to be a defensive match. I expect a low scoring affair. Vandy, South Carolina, line is at 5.5, over under 54. Vandy is going to look to grind you down and turn you into a powder of dust. Can they chew up the clock? Can they grind you down? Pavia hasn't really turned over the ball this season, but we know he's a little banged up right now. Where is that going to be at? Can they hold the time of possession here? Because if they can't do that, it is an uphill battle against the South Carolina team that offensively definitely comes in waves, but defensively gets after you. And so it's a hungry defensive line for South Carolina. It's a hungry defense. They're really great at creating havoc. That front seven is absolutely fantastic at it. Um, it, the question though will be, can Sellers attack Vandy through the air? Vandy lost two corners early this year in camp. They've struggled. They're great against the run, but they've struggled to really pass defend. My bad here, folks. Words are just, they're getting jumbled up. So I do like kind of South Carolina here in this spot. I would lean South Carolina. I think they still have more in the tank, but they had a big emotional win last week. So it's something to watch for. Washington, Penn State, line is at 13, over under 46.5. Do not sleep on Washington, folks. This is a really well-coached football team. They are just scoring. They are struggling to score the football. They move the football, but they are struggling to finish drives. If they could just finish some drives and stop shooting themselves in the foot, the win-loss column would look a lot different for this Washington team. Will Rogers has played fine this season. I think he's been a nice addition for Washington. The O-line is struggling, though. And so you do have concerns about Penn State's defensive line. Like, what are they going to do to this Washington offense line? I was a little underimpressed with them against the Ohio State game, but guys like Carter, I think, are going to have a fantastic game here. The interesting dynamic here for me, and we'll adjust the Penn State ranking accordingly, is what does the offense do here? Like, because Belichick likes to just kind of, drop guys back and pass protect. The strength of this Washington defense is their pass defense. It's 8th in success rate per dropback right now. But Penn State doesn't really have the athletes to scare you from a pass defense standpoint. So it'll be interesting to see if Belichick loads the box here, because Penn State's going to try to run the football. Does he load the box, and can Penn State get something going in those situations? If they can, they're going to win this football game. And then maybe I start to have a little bit more faith in this offense as they make a drive to the playoffs to host a home game in the playoffs, which I think is really what the expectation should be at Penn State right now. based on the circumstances. But that's really going to be the key dynamic here to watch. BYU, Utah, the Holy War line is at 3.5, over under 40. Utah still got a phenomenal defense. They will beat you up, but that offense, whoo, it is a stinker. Doesn't help the OC resign. Doesn't help the injury with Cam Rising. Had that injury not happened, does the OC resign and is Utah really vibing for a playoff spot? Yeah, I think so. Like, I think they're probably a playoff team because this defense is once again up to Utah standards. Offensively, they just can't do anything because they don't have a quarterback right now. Like, there's just no quarterback play. And that's going to be a problem. But you're facing BYU. It's a rivalry game. It's at home at Utah, one of the most underrated environments in college football. You can run on this BYU defense. So that will be an interesting dynamic here. BYU likes to play things on the edge. They like to keep things tight to the vest. They're a team that, it's a skill to win. It really is. And they are using that skill right now because they have a lot of games that are a lot closer than you would like for a team that can turn out some points offensively. But the defense has struggled at times. So it'll be an interesting matchup there. Bama LSU, though, the last matchup we're going to talk about, Lions at 2.5, over under 58.5. I cannot wait for this matchup. I cannot wait for it because of what it means, not only for the SEC, but also what it means for the playoffs. Because this is an SEC, the same way Ole Miss and Georgia are. I forgot to put that. Ole Miss and Georgia is an SEC championship eliminator game, but Bama LSU, they want to make the playoffs. The winner of this game has a shot to do it. The loser, I think that's probably it and done for them. Bama gets a timely bye. They get the bye before LSU like normal, but it's timely because Jalen Milroe, to me, looks banged up. We saw him hobbling around in that Tennessee game. He hasn't really looked right. And that's a problem because he needs that dual threat aspect to his game. When he's rolling, we saw that in the Georgia game in this Kalen DeBoer offense. That man is hard to stop. But if he is banged up, if he is injured, which would explain why his rushing kind of numbers are down here, why he's not as willing of a rusher right now. He was limping around in this Tennessee game. It changes the dynamic for this Alabama offense. It becomes a lot harder for them to do what they want to do. And you're going against an LSU defense that has slowly gotten better over the weeks here, but you can still get them in that pass game. That secondary is still very gettable here. Both these secondaries are still very gettable. And that's what brings me to my bigger point, the one that I am leaning on the most. LSU's offense versus this Bama defense. We know Bama is struggling right now. They've got some young guys they're relying on. They got a new defensive concept here. They're more an offensive geared team than a defensive team like they were under the Saban era. They're struggling defensively. They have coverage blows. You know what LSU loves to do? They love to throw the rock deep. Garrett Nussmeier is just winding up and launching it. Now, the decision-making has been rough at times, but he launches it. And if you're having coverage breakdowns, that could spell disaster for Alabama. Garrett Nussmeier, the other thing, I flagged it a couple weeks ago. I'll talk about it now and then. Really nice at his, maneuverability in the pocket. The way he's able to avoid pressure, reset his feet, and drive the ball has been really impressive. From my standpoint, it's just the decision making just has to get there a little bit. You've also got an LSU offensive line. It was arguably, the number one ranked offensive line coming into this season. I thought they were. A lot of other people did. They were definitely a top 3 offensive line. They have struggled as far as run blocking, and I think you can chalk that up to the shift in their blocking scheme this season. But where they haven't struggled is in pass blocking. They are still an incredibly good pass blocking unit. Can Alabama generate some pressure? Can they speed up that clock of Garrett Nussmeier so that he makes the bad decisions we have seen so much so recently? That's the key for Alabama. I don't think they can do that. I am rolling LSU in this game. Go Tigers. So that is it for the breakdowns. Just a quick little episode here. Make sure you're following me at the Trophy Kid on TikTok for all of the breakdowns, recaps, bets. Go ahead and follow Trophy Kids Pod. I'll tweet out a couple additional bets there. Hopefully you enjoyed this episode. And as always, peace.